Welcome to Fireside Gaming. I'm Billum, and this time around, our retro game journey brings us back to the Mega Man X series with a look at Mega Man X5 for the PlayStation 1. It's been a little bit since I last covered the X series with my review of X4 back in, November. Really? I said I was going to get to X5 and 6 shortly after that one, and it's been over half a year. Well, either way, Mega Man X5 is a game that I have a lot of memories with. It was one of the first PlayStation games I ever owned. When I got my PS2, I picked it up alongside a copy of Extreme G3. To explain that a little bit, I didn't own a PS1 before this, so I'd missed out on a lot of games. That, combined with new games still coming out for the console, resulted in me buying a lot of PS1 games in the years after getting my PS2. A few worth mentioning include Gundam Battle Assault 2, Final Fantasy Tactics, Chrono Cross, and Parasite Eve. In fact, one of the games I missed out on was Mega Man X4, and while I had the option of buying it or X5 when I picked up my PS2, I went with the latter. While that might seem like the wrong decision to some, I was still perfectly happy with it. Over the years, I've noticed that Mega Man X5 has a bit of a bad reputation, and I'd like to do my best to address some of those criticisms with my review. Don't get me wrong, X5 has its flaws, but it's often unfairly bashed on, in my opinion. Let's go over the story of X5 first, since it'll be hard to address those criticisms while trying not to spoil the game. That's also your spoiler warning, as I won't be holding back on story details. Before we get too deep into this though, I do want to talk about the poor localization of Mega Man X5. Many of you likely already know about the names of bosses in the game being changed to Guns N' Roses references, but there's a lot more to it than just that. Let's start with the opening of Mega Man X5 and the story presented in the manual. According to this, the events of Mega Man X5 take place after centuries of battle in what was called the Reploid War. This, combined with other story elements in the game, give off the idea that X5 takes place hundreds of years after X4. That is not the case. It's only been a few months. Also, we know this period of time in the Mega Man series is called the Maverick Wars, not Reploid Wars. So that was likely meant to be a reference to Repliforce from X4 instead. This made it incredibly confusing to play Mega Man X5 back when I was a kid. It built this false timeline for me that each Mega Man X game must have some kind of large gap between it. To clarify, I originally played the games out of order. I started with X, then played X2, and then X5. I just had to assume that something major happened in X3 and X4, which isn't far from the truth, but it wasn't near enough to warrant hundreds of years passing. But to get back on track, Mega Man X5 is only a few months after X4. The game actually changes it up a bit, with the boss of the opening stage being Sigma himself. X and Zero take him out easily enough, but this was actually a trap. With his body's destruction, Sigma spreads the Sigma virus across the Earth. This throws the world into chaos as Reploids go maverick and technology is negatively affected in various ways. Right after this, we get an update on the space colonies damaged in the Repliforce War. Many of them suffered damage during those battles and are being fixed up. The largest of them, Eurasia, was undergoing major repairs and upgrades due to its age. Unfortunately for X and Zero, Dynamo, a new enemy working under Sigma, has spread a virus across the colony and set it on a collision course for Earth. This leaves them with only 16 hours to stop the colony from crashing into the Earth. Aiding X and Zero this time around are a new team of Maverick Hunters. Leading the organization is the newly appointed commanding officer Cygnus. Alia serves as a navigator, which has her providing X and Zero with support from Maverick Base while they're out on missions. And finally, there's Douglas the engineer that offers his technical skills to the Maverick Hunters. This new crew of Maverick Hunters decide to use an old weapon called the Enigma Cannon to blast Eurasia out of the sky. However, it first needs some upgrades, which has X and Zero collecting the parts from 4 bosses. I have to point out real quick that not all of the bosses in X5 have gone Maverick. Some just plainly don't want to work with the Maverick Hunters, and that makes sense. While there's a global emergency happening, X and Zero's willingness to violate the choices of Reploids to aid their own plans acts as some interesting foreshadowing to future games and what happens with these characters. After beating those 4 bosses, the Enigma Cannon is fired, but fails to destroy Eurasia. Instead, it only throws it off course, gaining the Maverick Hunters a couple of extra hours to deal with the problem. With that time, X and Zero collect 4 parts to upgrade a space shuttle. The plan is to ram the space shuttle into the colony. The only problem is that someone has to pilot it, as the Sigma virus made the autopilot unstable. And of course, Zero is the only capable pilot still remaining. Zero accepts his mission and crashes the space shuttle into the falling colony. He's successful in destroying all but some small leftover parts that shouldn't do any major damage to the Earth. And to top things off, Zero was able to escape the blast without dying. Maybe we're finally about to break the curse of Zero nearly dying every other game. But there is one problem not taken into account. The Sigma virus spread across Earth combines with the colony virus. This creates a new virus, dubbed the Zero virus by Alia, as it has similar readings to the Red Maverick Hunter. X and Zero decide to check out this new virus and head to the remains of Eurasia that have crashed on Earth. Here they find a place called Zero Space, a physical manifestation of cyberspace in the real world. After traveling into the depths of this area, there's a conflict between X and Zero over the virus empowering the latter. X wants Zero to return to Maverick Hunter Base to get checked out, but Zero has no intention of doing this. I should mention that this can be played from either character's perspective. Whichever character the player chooses, that one will take on Sigma in the final battle. It's at this point we learn more about Sigma's plans and why he spread the virus across the Earth. Sigma was seeking to awaken Zero's true self by infecting him with the virus. He explains that this plan was concocted after meeting an old man, one that hates X and could also be considered a father to Zero. While it's never stated outright, we know this to be Dr. Wily. And in true Mega Man X fashion, X and Zero are successful in beating Sigma once again, but not without some major consequences this time around. Zero is badly damaged by Sigma self-destructing and is now missing the lower half of his body and one of his arms. X seems to be mostly unscathed and attempts to help Zero. Zero doesn't respond to X's calls, and we see the gruesome remains of Sigma appear behind the two. He fires a beam from his mouth that pierces X and Zero straight through the chest. This shocks Zero awake, and he fires off one last buster shot to defeat Sigma. From Zero's perspective, we get a look back at his life as his power supply runs out. That includes a flashback to his battle against Sigma that was first shown to us in X4. We also get an even earlier look into his life. This time we see Zero lying on a table in an incomplete state while Dr. Wily works on him. After this, we flash to Iris, with Zero apologizing to her and saying it'd be better for him to die and restore peace than keep on living. And with that, we watch Zero die for the second time in the series. Switching over to X's ending, we see the badly damaged robot clinging to life after Sigma's blast. A glowing figure appears over him, telling him to relax. We then see X repaired by this figure, which is clearly Dr. Light. Following this, we jump ahead 3 years to Maverick Hunter Base. X is leading a group of hunters to a battle with a Maverick. He's holding on to Zero's Z-Saber, saying that he can fight any enemy so long as he has it. And with that, the story of Mega Man X5 is complete. Mostly. Okay, there are some variations worth mentioning real quick. First off, the Enigma and Space Shuttle can fail to stop Eurasia from falling. If that happens, Zero ends up being reverted to his true self by the Zero virus. This has him and X doing battle. The same basic events transpire, but Dr. Light repairs X while removing his memories of Zero. This ending doesn't lead to the next game, so I won't be doing a big breakdown of it. Besides, I'd eventually love to do a video covering some Mega Man X theories, and I think it'd be better to elaborate on this bad ending then. Now let's talk about what does and doesn't work in Mega Man X5's story. Overall, I really enjoy the story X5 tells. It ramps up the stakes seen in previous Mega Man X games and feels like a conclusion to the series. And that's because it kinda was. X-Series leader Keija Inafune said as much in an interview in the Mega Man X Official Complete Works published in 2009. And if I'm being honest, I really wish this was the end of the X-Series. I'm a firm believer in letting series end instead of keeping them going forever. And it's not like Capcom wasn't working on sequels to the X-Series already. By the time Mega Man X5 came out, all 3 of the Mega Man Legends games had been published. Also, we know that the first Mega Man Zero game was already in development before X5's release. And if that wasn't enough, the first Battle Network game was also in development around this same time, just in case you wanted to revisit the classic Mega Man series with a twist. I've got a review of Battle Network 1 I'll link in the corner if you're interested in knowing more about that game. Basically, I'm saying that fans had plenty of other Mega Man content coming out that the X series really didn't need to continue after this. And I'm also a fan of personal sunsets for series. which is to say that fans should find jumping off points when they feel the time is right. This is that time for me. But don't worry, I'm still going to review the other Mega Man X games. So what complaints do I have about the story of X5? The opening doesn't really do it for me. The idea of Sigma dying and spreading a virus all throughout the world seems like a bit much. It just doesn't make sense to me that this time when Sigma dies, he infects everything as a virus, when he's been doing the whole virus after death thing ever since X1. And also, I want to go ahead and start talking about some of those criticisms of X5 I mentioned earlier. I'll be covering some of the more basic ones I've heard over the years. First up is the countdown mechanic used in Mega Man X5. As I said, players are given 16 hours to stop the Eurasia colony from falling to Earth. I've heard plenty of complaints about how this forces the player to rush through the game, and I don't see it. Here's the thing, the player only has to defeat 8 Mavericks in total before those 16 hours are up. Each time X and Zero enters a level, the time is reduced by 1 hour. Add in 2 times Dynamo shows up to battle X and Zero and you have 10 hours. That still leaves the player with 6 extra hours. Also, if the Enigma cannon deflects the colony, it buys players another 2 hours. Plus, if you complete a level with a high enough rank, it will refund the hour spent on it. That's enough time to go back and collect some missed items, or leave one level and try another if you're stuck, several times. And this isn't taking into account if the Enigma succeeds in destroying the colony flat out, which completely removes the countdown and takes the player to the endgame without them even needing to beat the other 4 bosses. Plus, you can always stop the colony first and revisit levels later to collect upgrades you might have missed along the way. And let's say that there's a worst case scenario where you don't stop the colony. All it does is lock the player into the bad ending. You still get to play and beat the game. Now let's talk about the second complaint. Dynamo isn't a well-developed character. Of course he's not! He's the rival that battles X and Zero throughout the game, and nothing more. That makes him just as developed as Double from X4, Bit and Bite from X3, Agile and Violin from X2, or even Vile from X1. I don't know why some fans get so caught up on Dynamo not having a larger presence in the story. Maybe it's because he's a really good design, but it's not fair to argue he deserves more than any other rival villains in the prior games on that logic alone. Next up are the complaints about the new characters in X5. This game introduces us to Cygnus, Alia, and Douglas, all of which are new characters that don't get much backstory in X5. And I really don't see it as a problem. Iris, Colonel, and General didn't exactly get major build-up in the games prior to X4, and neither did Double. Heck, Repliforce itself just kind of pops up out of nowhere in that game, and I've never seen anyone complain about it. That's true for most of the villains or allies that show up in previous X games. They just pop up. They're there. They have their stories for that game, and they're done. You don't see them again typically. So why does it matter this time? Why does it matter in X5? It shouldn't. It works just as well as in any other Mega Man X game. But my rebuttals here don't mean I'm excusing all of the game's flaws. For example, Mega Man X5 breaks its gameplay up too often with information from Alia. She loves to pop in and warn players about upcoming traps, or tell them to do the obvious, like not stand around on the already exploding trucks. Thanks, I couldn't figure that one out on my own. And on that same note, Mega Man X5 does have some annoying hurry up and wait levels. Dealing with the submarine and tidal whales level, or having to wait for the lava to clear and burn Dino Rex's level, are perfect examples of this. It just slows down the game in an unnecessary way. But to counter that, X5 features less multi-part levels, and that's a plus for me. X4 is filled to the brim with levels that have loading zones that split them into 2 parts. It makes them take too long and breaks the rhythm of the game. X5 does admittedly still have a couple of levels like this, but it's nowhere near as bad as it was in the previous game. This next one is really up to preference, but X5 forgoes animated cutscenes and voice acting. Some could see that as a downgrade, but considering the dub of Mega Man X4, I think it's an improvement. And X5 also progresses the gameplay of the series in natural ways. For example, players no longer have to choose between just X and Zero when playing through the game. Instead, they can freely switch between the characters for each mission. That's an excellent feature as it allows the players to see both X and Zero's ending without having to play through the entire game a second time. To go along with that, players can start the game as X and they get to keep the armor from Mega Man X4. It's not quite as powerful as it was in the previous game, but it alleviates one of my complaints about losing out on armors and abilities between games. And Zero does the same, as he gets to keep his air dash from X4 this time around. On that same note, there are now 2 armors for X to collect, the Falcon and Gaia armors. Each of these have their own uses, with the Falcon armor offering flight and the Gaia armor negating damage and death from spikes. And players can pick up these armor pieces with either X or Zero. And remember the ultimate armors for X and Zero and X4 that were only available through cheat codes? Now you can actually find them in the game. The only complaint I have is that X can't don his armors until he has every piece. And he also doesn't get to equip the ultimate armor as he gets it, which means it's best to die and select it from the main menu before moving forward. And that's a little weird considering Zero just plainly equips his black armor as soon as Dr. Light gives it to him. Also, Zero's armor actually increases his attack and defense rather than just being cosmetic like it was in X4. Mega Man X5 also makes Triangle the special weapon button by default. That means players can continue to use buster shots and sword swings with Square even when they have a special weapon equipped. This change was kind of introduced in X4, but wasn't made clear to the player. In that game, the base attack was on both Square and Triangle, with the special weapon taking priority on Square if equipped. That means normal attacks had to be done with Triangle instead, which wasn't as natural and isn't explained well in the game's manual. Another new feature to Mega Man X5 is the level system. Bosses in the game have levels that determine how much health they have. The game starts with bosses being low leveled. This makes the game easier for players, but also stops them from collecting extra parts. That includes more life or weapon energy, as well as extra parts that can change how X and Zero play, such as always firing charge shots or increasing the Z-Saber's damage. X5 increases the level of bosses for each one defeated. It also increases the level based on the player's rank at the end of each mission. That means that a good player will encounter tougher fights, but be more rewarded for it. On the flip side of that, worse players won't have as much trouble against bosses, but they also won't get as many extra parts to play around with. It's worth pointing out that this scaling works well, as X5 still features the normal heart containers, energy tanks, and other items from prior games to give players an edge. That means even if players miss out on parts, they'll still be well equipped to tackle the end of the game with a little extra exploration. Moving on to the graphics, I can safely say that Mega Man X5 retains much of the same visual flair as X4. The sprites are incredibly detailed, and it's a great looking 2D PS1 game. Getting into a bit more of an opinionated area, I love the looks of both the Falcon and Gaia armors. Each of them have their own distinct feel that I think is great. The Falcon armor offers that nice sleek look, while the Gaia armor is sporting a much more chunky profile. It's really the best of both worlds, and I'd love to see them get model kits someday. When it comes to the soundtrack, Mega Man X5 mostly delivers. It plays around by adding in some callbacks to previous games, and that's alright in my book. The only one that bothers me is Tidal Whale Stage being a remix of Bubble Crab Stage. It feels less like a fun homage and more like a reused asset to me. Overall, I truly do believe Mega Man X5 is a really good game. It moves the series forward with some natural gameplay improvements that I wish older games had. I see the lack of multiple playthroughs required as a plus and enjoy the collection aspects more than in other games. And I can't forget its well-told story that really has a sense of weight to it even with its poor localization. Add in that wonderful X-Series sprite art and audio, and I've got no problem recommending this game. For me personally, this is where the X-Series ends. There's a real sense of closure here that works for me, and it acts as a perfect jumping off point to start the Mega Man Zero series with. But of course, I'm going to review the other games in the series. I won't lie though, I have historically hated 6, and have no desire to play it right away. That means it might be a little bit before I get around to it. Just giving you all a fair warning. And with that said, thank you for stopping by. If you're looking for more retro reviews, I've got them. Maybe check out my Wild Arms review if you've got the time. It's my longest one yet, and I'm pretty proud of how it came out. I've also started covering indie games as well, with my first one being Spark the Electric Jester, which takes some design cues from the Mega Man X series. I've also been thoroughly covering the Mega Man X series with reviews for X1, 2, 3, and 4, as well as Extreme 1 and Extreme 2 if you want to go back and check those out as well. And as always, take it easy.